Good evening. Welcome to the American Meditation Institute and this New Year's Transformation webinar, Let the Experiments Begin. We are delighted that you're here as we kick off the third annual National Conscience Month. So tonight we have invited AMI students to talk about experimenting with the conscience to make choices and changes that lead to better health and greater happiness. My name is Jennifer Masters and I will be moderating our discussion. I've been a student at AMI for 2 years now, and I had the privilege of serving as editor for Ramlev's book, Your Conscience, which some of you I'm sure have read. We will start off tonight with a brief video based on the call to humanity, which is found at the beginning of the book, followed by a short explanation about the conscience and the mind by author, scientist, and teacher Leonard Perlmutter, who is also the founder of AMI.
I wrote this book to address a crisis in education. Many of us, no matter when we graduated from high school, were only educated to memorize and recite information. Perhaps a truly skilled teacher taught us critical thinking skills. But it is highly unlikely that we learn to develop the practical and creative tools that reliance on the conscience can provide. As a result, we are ignorant of our own innate, brilliant human capacity to make the wise and kind decision in every circumstance. The conscience gives us the confidence to know what's to be done and what's not to be done, no matter what challenge we face. But our ignorance of the power of the conscience blinds us and leads to suffering. The relentless onslaught of information from our mobile devices, cable news, emails, and social media feeds adds yet another layer of stress and anxiety we are not equipped to manage. At an alarming rate, bits of new data challenge our security and titillate our pleasure centers in our brain, driving us to make snap decisions that lead to fear, anger, disease, and even death. Technology may have changed how we were taught and how we stay connected to one another, but it has not addressed this serious deficit in our collective education. At this auspicious moment, an openness to embracing new and old ideas from beyond our present cultural matrix can bring us the sustenance and growth we desperately need and desire. Our modern American culture now faces a golden opportunity to go beyond its impoverished rigidity, superstition, blind customs, and dogma to attain the spiritual and philosophical wealth necessary to solve all of life's challenges. Today, a new reliance on our conscience as our guide can make it possible for each of us to access and integrate intuitive wisdom and to establish greater personal security, creativity, and peace of mind. As we experiment with the profound gifts of the conscience, to determine our thoughts, words, and deeds, we are destined to become both prophets and beneficiaries of our own superconscious wisdom. For this noble endeavor, learning how to use the infinite resources of the conscience is not simply a good idea. It is a dire necessity. And good evening. As many of you know, I'm Leonard Romlev. It's a pleasure to be here. And as you just heard, I wrote Your Conscience because of a perceived crisis in education. So this evening, I'd like to share with you a brief introduction to some of the core teachings from our lineage. Now, for many of you who have been students at AMI, the information will be familiar. But I must remind you, as you probably know, the first time you received this knowledge, your mind was different. So it's different tonight. And because of the relationships that we all have, the dynamics of the world in which we live, it's more important than ever before to understand about the mind and how the mind functions. So let me share the screen. And I'd like to talk off of a PowerPoint so that it's a little more visual. So let the experiments begin. So as many of us know, thoughts are really a portion of our creative energy. That's why the compassionate Buddha thousands of years ago said all that we are is the result of what we have thought. That's right. Thoughts, our richest resource, lead to actions that could be verbal or it could be physical, but they all lead to consequences. And that in itself begs the question, doesn't it, for all of us? What's the consequence you desire in your life? Regardless of the situation, what do you want to experience? And for most of us, on some level, it's a question of happiness, health, and security. That's what we want. Then the question becomes again, how are we going to experience that? How are we going to get to point B from point A? And what is point A? Well, point A are all the thoughts we think that lead to words and physical actions that bring about consequences. So that puts a tremendous emphasis on thoughts and the power of thoughts. Each thought is extremely important. It's our creative energy. But every thought is only a suggestion. It is not an imperial command. For us, that was a game changer. Just that one understanding that every thought that comes into our awareness is not necessarily the ultimate truth. It needs to be examined. And how to do that? To understand the functions of the mind. So here we have a wheel with spokes. The wheel represents the body. And we want the body to take an action, a skillful action that'll bring health and happiness and security. And the four spokes are the four functions of the mind. Of course, in the lower right, we see the ego. We're pretty familiar with ego. Ego, which seems to be hardwired to the reptilian brain, is all about self-preservation and the fear of annihilation. So it insinuates itself in every kind of relationship that we have to lobby and tell us, oh, this is pleasant, let's reprise it. That's unpleasant, let's avoid it. This is good, let's go for it. That's bad, let's get rid of it. That's ego. Only a limited perspective, can't make a decision, but it can lobby and can be loud and pushy, often wrong, but never in doubt. Similar with the senses of sight and smell and taste and hearing and touch to find out and explore this wondrous world in which we're living. And the logic portion constantly asks this question, should I do it or should I not do it? Should I say it or should I not say it? Should I think it or should I not think it? And the conscience itself is the only function of the mind that can discriminate, determine, judge, and decide. The conscience is our decision maker. And the unconscious, that's the memory bank of merits and demerits, things that we deem essential to self-preservation. So with that understanding, we have to realize that, yes, the conscience can make the decision, but it can make two kinds of decisions. It can act like a rubber stamp. When the ego, senses, and unconscious mind are not coordinated, not taught to be coordinated, then they're loud, they're pushy, they create a tremendous amount of noise in the mind. We're very familiar with that. And when the ego, senses, and unconscious mind create so much noise in the mind, yes, the conscience will make the choice. It's the only decision maker. But in that case, with so much noise, it will simply rubber stamp the loudest voice. But when we can parent the mind, parent the ego, senses, and unconscious mind, invite each of them to share their limited perspective respectfully, and then quiet down. In that quietude, the conscience then can act like a mirror. It can reflect superconscious wisdom from the superconscious portion of the mind and bring it right into our conscious mind. So we will know immediately the thought to think, the word to speak, and the action to take that will enable us to fulfill the purpose of our lives without pain, without misery, without bondage. So the key, if we really want to be free from all these faulty concepts, from these limited perspectives of ego, senses, and unconscious mind, we need to coordinate the functions of the mind so that we can access and benefit from the superconscious wisdom reflected by the conscience. Then the conscience is not just rubber stamping the loud voices of the ego, the senses, and the unconscious mind. No, it doesn't mean that they'll all be wrong all the time. But the conscience in the quietude of the mind then can reflect superconscious wisdom from the core of our being. And that can resolve all the challenges that we have in life. So if we don't coordinate the four functions of the mind to make the best use of our conscience, what's going to happen? Well, there's a little story I'd like to tell you about that, about a man who was gaining quite a bit of weight, and he was concerned about it. So he spoke to his friend, and he asked his friend, "Listen, I've been gaining some weight, and I don't know how to lose the weight." And the friend said, "Well, tell me more, tell me more." He says, "Well, I live very close to work, and very often I walk to work. A little extra energy and exercise, I thought that I would lose more weight. But it turns out that when I walk to work, I always pass a fabulous bakery. And even before I arrive at that bakery shop, I can smell the goodies baking. And the next thing I realize, I'm walking out of the bakery, walking to work with a little bag in my hand of donuts. So do you have any suggestion for me?" And the man thought and said, "Well, on those days that you walk to work, why don't you leave your wallet at home?" And the man recoiled in shock and said, You want me to steal the donuts?" So obviously that person who was gaining the weight, who could only think of stealing the donuts, was not coordinating his functions of the mind, so that was the only option that he could think of, because he was so attached to the sweetness of the donuts.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ramlev. I just love that story. It cracks me up every time, but it's because it's so true. It's so and it's so relatable. The tricks that our mind can play on us. And I want to also welcome Janice. I'm sorry, Janice, I didn't say hello to you earlier. So thank you. I'm glad that you're here. Okay, so with that, let's get to our discussion with our panelists to see if they were more successful than our donut-loving friend when they chose to undertake some experiments. When at AMI, we learned to do this. We learned to conduct these experiments in an attempt to figure out how to coordinate the functions of our mind. So we decide to make a small change in our lifestyle for a short period of time, a limited period of time. It's a little bit different than what the standard notion is of a New Year's resolution. We don't talk about doing this forever. We're just doing an experiment. It could be related to food, to sleep, to our relationships, to our attitudes, any area of our lives. And then after the period of the experiment, we evaluate. We take a look, we reflect, we contemplate what has happened during that time, and we see how we feel. And then from that evaluation, we decide what we want to do next. So it's so simple, right? Well, yes and no, sometimes. As you just heard, the conscience can be drowned out by all of these other functions of the mind. So let's hear, we'll start with DJ. But before, sorry, DJ, before you start, I want to invite all of our listeners, please feel free, as we're going through the panelists, feel free to ask any questions that you may have in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And we'll get to as many of those as we can at the end. So DJ, you are first up as our panelist. Thank you for being here. Welcome. Could you tell us how long you've been a student at AMI and also what you did for your experiment?
Sure, yes. Thank you for having me. I've been a student, I think, for over, it hasn't been 2 years, so maybe a year and a half. Often I think maybe not long enough. So I guess my experiment, I'm still thinking about donuts. My experiment.
Every thought is only a suggestion.
I'm trying to debate that. No. So my experiment is really topical, I guess, for New Year's resolutions, but it actually happened about 3 months ago. And so at AMI, we're taught to have a daily meditation practice, as well as a practice of contemplation, repentance, and prayer. And contemplation is really just a simple process of reflecting on all the day's thoughts, words, and actions by asking yourself what of those thoughts, words, and actions have been helpful and which of them have kind of gotten in your way and are kind of obstacles to leading a happy, healthy, joyful life. So I think in this way, AMI, teaches us to make a daily New Year's resolution. It's something that we wake up and, go to sleep and commit to and wake up every single day. And one day during my contemplation, I realized that for years, I had been kind of slowly developing an unhealthy relationship with my exercise routines, which were mostly running and Pilates. Somewhere along the way, I started to think about those exercises as a form of punishment. I ate too much, so now I have to make myself run. Or I feel terrible about my body, now I have to work out. And thoughts like these, that they became over the years so habitual that exercise, which is for me, when I first started kind of exercising, was meant to like sharpen my ability and improve my mental and physical, well-being. It became really negative, and it was, far from joyful. So as soon as I had the realization, I knew that I needed to change the way that I had been thinking about exercise. And we often say at AMI, like, change your perspective and change your experience. So I knew that I needed to see this relationship with exercise and my body and my mind and this kind of terrorizing behavior differently. So I told myself that I realized from now on, I'm going to exercise not because I was bad or made a bad decision or ate too many donuts. But that from now on, I'll exercise because I have a body that's capable of enjoying life in this particular way. And I'm going to exercise not because I'm beautiful, not because I've done something wrong. In yoga science, we learn kind of about restraints, so that we call them yamas, and then also positive duties and observances, which we call niyamas. And there's 3 of them that were important to kind of this realization. The first one, which is kind of really important one, called ahimsa, which is non-violent and non-harming. And that means, being non-harming in thought, word, and action. And not only was it not bad enough that I wasn't making the right decision about what I was eating, I was then harming myself further with my thoughts. So that was not in alignment with ahimsa. The second one is asteya, which is non-stealing. And Jessica, who you'll hear from in a little bit, we were in a class together about the yamas and the niyamas, and she had mentioned that asteya, non-stealing, which I wasn't really connecting with at the time, but is a way of thinking, why would I steal this opportunity from myself to be healthy and to enjoy exercise? And that really changed my perspective. And then the final one is tapas, which is discipline or self-discipline. So needing to have the discipline to stick with an exercise routine and a eating routine, but then also to stick with a contemplation practice that would allow me to kind of root out the negativity or self-loathing habits that had become so habitual that I was doing them and didn't even know. So, we're taught to not get stuck or wallow in unskillful behavior. We're taught to be loving to ourselves. And in our meditation and contemplation practice, when we come across something called a stumbling block, or we recognize an unhelpful behavior, we're taught to see it differently and to transform the stumbling block, into a stepping stone, which is something that's pretty simple. But it's actually really difficult, as we can see with different stories. Now, I'm not perfect, and this is still a daily opportunity for me to practice self-discipline and ahimsa, but I work out far more regularly now and with far more pleasure. So I'm also kind of far more aware of my mind and how negative thoughts impact my behavior in every field of action. So I guess this little experiment for me has been kind of the basis for some of the most incredible feelings of empowerment. And that's just, I think, the reason why I'm sharing the experiment and the feelings that I'd like everyone to experience. So.
Terrific.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That's really great. And it reminds me of a little shift in language that I heard one time that was that has stuck with me, thinking about things like exercise or doing the dishes, rather than saying I have to exercise or I have to do the dishes, I get to exercise and I get to do the dishes. And your story totally is that. I have this beautiful opportunity to do this. So thanks, DJ. Thanks so much. Jessica, you're up next. Welcome. We're so happy that you're here. If you could, when your face pops up, there you are. If you could tell us how long you've been a student and what your experiment was.
Sure. Thanks, Jennifer. I was introduced to AMI back in February of 2021, so a little less than a year. And in that small time with experimentation and the teaching, I've been able to make some really transformative and beneficial changes in my life. I went to a plant-based diet. I stopped drinking wine. My relationships are growing. There are so many examples. And the successes that I experienced in those realms gave me the confidence to take on something I thought I could never take on, which was my morning coffee. I truly believed that I was the type of person that had to have coffee to function normally. And of course, I learned in the foundation course and in AMI's teaching that I should ask myself who authored that thought. And of course, when I asked myself that, I realized it was my ego, you know, holding on to the personality that it thinks it is, and its fear of change. And of course, my senses that want that jolt in the morning, and that sense gratification. So knowing that, and having succeeded in other experiments, and knowing that it was just a test, not a commitment, I was able to parent the functions of the mind. I was able to tell the ego and the senses, we're going to be fine here. This is only a little while. So I practiced ahimsa toward myself, and I changed the coffee grounds to cacao grounds, which is not coffee, and it's almost entirely caffeine free, but it was enough to let the senses have their little morning ritual as a stepping stone. And when I was feeling in the first few days in the morning, when I was working at my desk and I was feeling a little bit groggy, I was able to employ easy, gentle yoga, which I had learned in the AMI Foundation course, to energize myself and help myself perform and do my work, even though I was sort of feeling a new experience without the coffee. And I also had a little low-grade headache, a different headache than I had ever had before. And I knew it was coffee related. And instead of pouring a cup of coffee to cure that, as my ego wanted me to do, I listened to my conscience, and I realized, this is withdrawal from a substance that you've been depending on, and you don't want to depend on that. So I went forward with the experiment, and what I found was that the quality of my sleep in the evening was better. It was less agitated. So I learned that coffee that I had been having early in the morning was actually staying in my system and impacting my body in the middle of the night, which I wouldn't have really known. You could have told me that and I wouldn't have believed you. I had to experience it. That's the beauty of these experiments too, by the way, is you really learn them deeply, and that's how they're transformative. And I also discovered that I had more energy throughout the day, a more reliable, calmer energy. And that seemed like it would be counterintuitive, but I learned that the substance I had been relying on to give me energy was actually stealing my natural energy. So it was a very successful experiment, and I'm still not drinking coffee.
Great.
Wow. Congratulations. I'm guessing there are quite a few people out here who can relate to that. And I will say I admire your creativity and your determination. It's terrific. Thank you so much. Next up, we have Jeff. Thank you for being here, Jeff. Nice to see you. Could you tell us how long you've been a student and also what your experiment was?
I have been a student for 4 years. In fact, I first met Leonard 4 years ago today.
Wow.
It was my first foundation class. And my experiment deals with prayer. I chose prayer because it's the first experiment I engaged in after meditation itself. It's not that I never before had a relationship with prayer or God. As a youth, even as a young teen, I regularly prayed. However, my prayers were much different then than they are today. I always prayed to an entity in the sky who was watching over me and could keep me from hell and possibly help me through situations in the here and now. After years of experiencing what seemed to be lack of results, I gave up. That's when my long search for happiness in the external world of names and forms began. I started meditating after a couple courses at AMI, but it wasn't until I took the foundation course, also at AMI, that I learned about God-centered prayer and unity that incorporated prayer into my daily life. Now I pray formally before morning and evening meditations and at various times during the day. You see, my prayers have gone from petitioning to making offerings. The offerings are attachments, things the ego is fond of, but really aren't working for me. Old habits and concepts that are obstacles to my growth. And they need to be sacrificed through prayer. You're probably asking yourself at this point, what does this have to do with conscience? Well, I'll tell you. It is the conscience that determines what's to be done and what's not to be done, and therefore dictates which thoughts, words, and deeds are to be sacrificed and which ones I should give my attention to. And through prayer, I believe I have heightened awareness of my conscience as the decision maker, both working with and often in opposition to the ego, senses, and unconscious mind. Thank you for your attention.
Perfect. That's great.
Thank you, Jim.
It's
Thank you so much, Jeff.
Very powerful.
You're welcome.
It's a powerful shift from those prayers of petition to the prayers of offering. I'm curious, do you say a different prayer every time, or do you have one prayer that you say? Oh, can't hear you. Ah, we still can't hear you. Shoot.
Yes?
Yeah.
Ah, yes, there you are.
I'm sorry. My prayers are slightly different every time. Very similar in theme and kind of layout. But you know, I wing it. Say, you know, depends on where I'm at. It's a relationship, I guess. It's
That's
another
right.
relationship.
Right.
That's right.
Yeah, I take it as it comes.
Perfect.
Beautiful. Thank you. Okay, next up we have Amy. Amy, thank you for being here so much, and I look forward to hearing about your experiment. And don't forget to tell us how long you've been a student at AMI.
I've been studying at AMI for about 16 years now. And my experiment started back in early January of 2021. We were deep in the middle of the pandemic, and I found myself struggling mentally and emotionally with the pressures created by extended quarantine. I was newly homeschooling my children at the time, and just the darkness created by those Northeastern winters. And the pain and the emotional heaviness that I was experiencing really served as an alarm bell that I had to do something different. And though I had been a student at AMI for a while, I hadn't to that point created a consistent seated meditation effort. It really had been sporadic. So as I'm a mother of 3 young children, and prior to embarking on my journey in motherhood, I held a job as a director of a school. And that program ran programs, days, weekends, nights. And the demands of my time were so intense during that period that I was just busy all of the time. And then I began having my children. And they were all born, my 3 children were born 2 years apart. And I really developed a mental attitude of bankruptcy towards time from all of that running around and busy and demands from work. I never thought I had enough, but from attending classes at AMI, I knew that concept was faulty. It's simply not true. Everyone can find a few minutes somewhere in their day. So my commitment was, or my experiment was to commit with an undeterrable will that I was going to sit for daily meditation every day for a year. And really my intention at the time was simply to deepen my practice. But what was born of that effort was so much more. Not only was my spiritual practice deepened, but the mental and emotional darkness that I was experiencing during that time lifted almost instantaneously. And I found that I had increased willpower and energy to make so many more changes to my life that year. I also noticed that my mind was becoming much more focused, and I was able to complete my responsibilities so much more efficiently. So the funny and amazing thing about all that is for years I had resisted this because I didn't want to give the time. But what was born of that experiment was that by giving that time to meditation, I was gaining more time in my day because my efficiency and my focus and my energy had increased so profoundly.
That is terrific. And that's so true, that so many unknown, unimagined benefits just flow to us because we are aligning ourselves with the truth of the universe. It's terrific. I'm happy for you and the family and all of your relationships.
Thank you.
It's a wonderful ripple effect.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much, Amy. Next up, we have Andre. Thank you for being here, Andre, and tell us how long you've been a student and how you chose to experiment.
Hello, Jennifer, and thank you. My association with AMI began over 10 years ago. I've participated in many of the courses offered at the Institute, which have and continue to expand my experience and understanding of consciousness. One thing I learned is the notion of there being 4 major functions of the mind that could be acknowledged and examined, and that has always intrigued me. More recently, I have developed the intention of honoring and following the guidance that the conscience offers. So my experiment actually takes place over most of my adult life in having developed the global skill of learning how to drive a car. I have been reminded many times that being able to drive a car involves a healthy ego. You need an ego to drive a car. And my grandfather was the one who taught me many, many years ago how to drive his Dodge Polara with the automatic shift on the column. And it was a wonderful experience. So driving has always been a pleasure and a relaxation for me. So about a month ago, we were going on a road trip. We were in a car. I was the driver, and my girlfriend was the passenger, and we happened to be in her car. And we had driven over country roads, hills, little different weather patterns that were happening, and we then got onto a major highway through Massachusetts. The traffic was brisk. Cars were passing on both sides of the lane that we were in. The speeds were quite high. The weather was not problematic, and I felt very comfortable. I was focused on the task at hand. At one point, Robin looked at me and said, you know, you're driving a little bit too close to the center of the line, and you might want to consider moving over a little bit because the cars in the passing lane are getting really close to the car. Now, I was comfortable with the way I was driving. I acknowledged what she said, but I didn't change my behavior. My ego was telling me I was driving fine, and we were fine. After a few more miles, Robin yet again said, with a little bit more emphasis, you're still driving too close to the center line, and there are more cars coming, and I'm really uncomfortable. So what I started experiencing at that point was a little bit of anger. I could feel anger rising inside of me. How could she be questioning my driving, which happens to be so perfect at this point? So we continued a little bit further, maybe another 2.5, 3 miles. And her next statement was very emphatic. She said, I've had enough. When there is a clear place for you to pull over and stop, I want you to stop because I don't want you to drive anymore, and I am going to drive. Now, her emphasis and her voice told me that she was experiencing some emotional energy. And what started dawning on me at that point through a process over a few seconds was that she was in fear. And that was one thing I think that my anger that I was experiencing was camouflaging me from seeing. I was not giving my attention to her, to this passenger who was telling me in no uncertain terms that she was in fear. Now, as soon as I realized that fear was operating in the situation, I could feel a release and a certain comfort and relaxation within me taking place, which led to an acceptance of what she was saying to me. So I moved the car a little bit into the center lane, and we began a discussion back and forth about what we were each individually experiencing. I told her that I was sorry that I was not acknowledging her feelings in the situation, and that I was not considerate of that, and that it was my anger that had blinded me to that. So we had a comfortable conversation. I have to say we made it safely to our destination. And what I continue to feel at this point, just through that one experiment, that one situation, is my times when I'm not paying full attention to another person that I'm with, that I'm in a relationship with, whether it's sitting in a car, or whether it's walking down the street with somebody, or sitting in a room in conversation. The important thing, which is very important, is to be giving full attention. And that is one of the things through the AMI and through meditation and through the teaching that I am learning, is that attention is key, is important to every moment, with every situation, with every thought, word, and deed. So thank you.
That's terrific. That's such a practical, everyday kind of experience in the midst of relationship, how our own emotional reactions can blind us to the needs of others. Things that I'm capable of giving, but in this particular case, I'm blinded. Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And last we have Doreen. Doreen, it's so nice to see you. Welcome. Please tell us how long you've been a student and what kind of an experiment you chose to undertake.
Thank you, Jennifer, and everyone for inviting me to participate. I have been a student of AMI for 20 years. I love the teachings. I love everything about it, and it has never failed. It has never failed me in all the experiments. So my experiment is with procrastination. I've been working on the ego's habit of procrastination for a while now. Its definition means to delay or postpone despite knowing there will be negative consequences. In yoga science, it means me serving my ignorance. On the outside, it appeared that I was making progress. I would consult with my conscience about what needed to be done, and I would do it, even if it was a little uncomfortable for the personality. Then my sisters stopped talking to me. This has happened many times in the past without warning. I addressed the issue right away by calling and texting, so I didn't go back to the habit of procrastination. However, no response. Then the functions of the mind started to offer opinions. It wanted to fix the problem. So it began recalling memories from the past and projecting into the future with possible conversations, back and forth, back and forth. The personality was stuck. The conscience reminded me to surrender these thoughts and to come back into the present moment using my mantra, which I thought I was. Then a week later, the body developed a migraine. I was out for the count, and during the second day in bed, repeating my mantra, trying to relieve the pain, I asked my conscience the question, what am I supposed to learn from this event? I immediately heard the response from the superconscious wisdom saying, stop procrastinating. After contemplating that suggestion, I realized that even though I've been outwardly working on procrastination, inwardly, mentally, I was delaying the surrender of attachments and expectations from all those thoughts regarding my sister. In conclusion, my conscience taught me that all the work needs to be done on the inside first. And the experiment revealed to me the strong connection between the mind and the body. Thank you.
Powerful, practical,
Thank you, Satya.
rewarding.
Thank you.
Satya.
Those flashes of insight that we can get when we pay attention to what our body is telling us. It's such a beautiful illustration of that. Thank you so much. So I would like to ask all of you, and feel free to just jump in as you're so moved. Can you summarize for us how would you say that you felt after you completed your experiment? And you could talk in terms of how you felt physically, mentally, emotionally, or spiritually. And I'm just anything else that you would like to say about your, as you look back, what have your thoughts been?
I want to mention, as the new kid on the block, how powerful it is to do an experiment and to learn from it. How powerful it is in giving you the impetus to try new experiments, and also to realize how strong you really are. My teachers had told me before embarking on another, a more difficult experiment, that I was stronger than I thought. And now I know that deeply, because I've experienced these things, you know, just like you can tell a child that the oven is hot, but when they touch it, they know it. And that's what experiments have done for me. So I'm excited about a whole list of them that I have ready to go slowly with ahimsa.
Mm-hmm.
I would just like to resonate with that, with what Jessica has said, that it really is about direct experience. We can all tell you what we've experienced, but until you do it yourself, then it's just hearsay. But when you do the experiment, then you know that truth for you. It might not be the same truth for someone else, but it's the truth for you, and you know it. There's nothing needs to be validated. You know it deep within your core. Thank you.
As for me, my experiment is obviously continuing. This one, as well, I feel like my whole life is an experiment at this point. And you know, I can't equate it to particularly this one, but the practice in general has changed my life. It's improved every relationship I have. It's phenomenal.
I'd like to mention one thing in relationship to what Jeff just said. In my own experience of working with these experiments, it's important that you recognize this is not a quid pro quo. You're not making a deal with a certain outcome that you're expecting. You have to be open-ended with it, because in my own experience, the benefit comes with an extended or empowered energy for something that you could not face before, even if it had nothing to do with the particular specifics of your experiment. And it's you know, when you get that benefit, that how did this come to me? It came to me because I let go of the way I was using energy for an old habit.
So everything is connected. So the experiment could take place on a specific field of action, and the benefit could arise on an entirely different field of action.
And very well may.
Right. So the point is that the whole process of experimentation literally is a thrill a minute.
I know for myself that one element that I'm finding is expanding and growing more and more is when my intention for attention in a particular matter is put forth. When my intention to gain clarity or to see something a little bit differently than I had seen it before, to experience a new experience, the intention really sort of wells up in me more and more that I want to experience happiness in this particular situation. I want to experience a little bit more freedom in this particular experience that's coming forth. And I'm starting to trust that process more and more as time goes on. And that is, it's so rewarding. It's so rewarding, gearing the intention of an outcome. So thank you.
So that echoes the experience of Jesus when he says that blessed are the pure of heart. They shall see God. They shall know God. They shall know the truth that will set them free. So it's about intention. It's not about accomplishment. These experiments are not about hitting home runs or throwing a 40-yard touchdown pass. It's just about, like in the Buddhist tradition, just chopping the wood, carrying the water, doing the dishes, making the bed, going to sleep at a certain hour so that the body can rest, getting up early so that we can budget enough time to meditate so I can fill, the gas tank up in my mind, body, sense complex so I can be of service for the day. So it's very interesting.
In my experience, a realization, turns into an experiment. But then once you kind of do that in like more of a structured way, you kind of enter into another space or something. It's like you kind of have this like portal of information. The information kind of puts you in a portal of a different place, and then you have a different awareness, and then you don't really. Then I find that I don't have to experiment with certain things so intentionally. It's more of an intuitive awareness that then changes your behavior. So it might start off very decided for me, but then also it builds its own inertia. And one experiment, like you're saying, opens up a whole other level of something. And that doesn't mean it's all easy street after that. My personal experiment opened up a whole host of other things and emotions and things that I need to deal with, with myself, but it's another level and another level of awareness.
My experience was when I made the decision to start meditating every day, my intention was truly just to deepen my spiritual practice. But at that time, there was so much going on, especially with trying to figure out how to newly homeschool the kids. I was so overwhelmed. I was just short-circuiting left and right. Whereas a dinner should have taken an hour to make, it was taking me an hour and a half to 2 hours, double the time, because my attention was so scattered. I feel like in this day and age, we've got cell phones going off, we've got kids that have needs. There's so many stimulus going on, and a lot of that's pulled by the technology. that there's so much noise going on in your head. And what I didn't realize until I sat down and created those moments of stillness was how loud that noise was and what the impact of that noise was. So it gives you the opportunity to start understanding yourself more and what needs to happen and what the shifts are you need to do to make the changes that you want to see. And so, you know, what I noticed is that just by, it was very quickly within a month or two, by just sitting consistently for meditation, all of a sudden that problem resolved itself. And I was not distracted during dinner, and a dinner that should take an hour was taking an hour. But by embarking on those experiments, you get so much information of where the pitfalls are and what you need to do so that the next time you encounter that situation, you're armed with that awareness. And it really empowers you to walk through the same situation the next time much more skillfully.
So thank you. I would like to ask Jennifer to read the question that somebody in the audience has sent in, and then we can comment a little bit on it.
Thank you. Yes. So here's the question. What happens when an experiment fails in quotation marks, to create a positive experience? How have any of the panelists handled experiments that did not work out as they had predicted? How does a yoga scientist determine if an experiment is a success?
Okay, so the first thought that comes into my awareness by the question, the essential question is, what happens when an experiment fails to create a positive experience? My first question would be, which function of the mind has just authored that thought and that question? And what is the agenda of the ego for asking that question? Because there is no failure. Ask Thomas Edison. Everything, as Jeff suggested, is a stepping stone, not a stumbling block. Whatever comes is a new beginning. And I go to school on the equation that was created in the experiment, and I take out my pencil and I take out the eraser section and I recompute the equation and see if it feels a little bit better. But the benefits don't necessarily get, as I mentioned earlier, the benefits don't necessarily accrue in that particular situation. They could come somewhere else, like a thief in the night. You think that the benefit is going to come through the front door? They'll come in the back door. You think they're going to come in the back door? They'll come in the side window. You think they're going to come in the side window? They'll come down the chimney.
That's the really important point. Here, our energy is tied up in old habits. And when you stop giving it that habit the right to use your energy, then that energy is available to you as it's needed somewhere else. It's that simple. And to be able to undertake an experiment without an expectation of where you want to be paid for it, mm-hmm. that is key to the success of the experiment. You have to be open to see what actually comes from it, what comes to you, because you stopped using energy in a habitual way.
And it occurs to me, I've heard you say this, it's all information. It's whatever happens, it's all information, and it is all an opportunity, as you tell us often, to go to school. And in our contemplation practice, which DJ talked about, what a lot of people talked about, that's when it's appropriate to do that.
That's what I love about Thomas Edison. This great scientist never had a failure. Never considered that he ever had a failure. Everything was a recalculation. It was all good information.
Do any panelists have any thoughts that they'd like to share about that? We're getting close to the, in fact, we are at the 8 o'clock hour. I'm going to go ahead and close. Thank you so much to all of our panelists, and thank you, Ramlev and Janice. It's just been such a joy to be with you tonight. I also want to thank Valerie, who is off the screen. You can't see her, but she is a creative force behind this and so many events at AMI. And she's our behind the scenes video technician tonight. One final note on transformation. I've been thinking a lot about this, and I think that it was illustrated so beautifully tonight by all of our panelists. It happens slowly. It happens over time. It's not, you know, it's not a January, new year, new you kind of a thing. It's a slow progression, one experiment at a time. It's this cumulative effect that happens. And these profound changes that people have spoken about, it's almost like they sneak up on us. And it's just been such a joy for me personally to experience it and to witness, to be a part of this community where that happens and we get to hear about it. It's really a blessing. So we hope that you have found our discussion intriguing and that you might be inspired to join us in this National Conscience Month by experimenting with your own conscience. If you are stuck and you don't know where to, what you might want to experiment with, there's a whole chapter in this book called Where to Start When You Don't Know Where to Start. So that's there for the taking. And we look forward to hearing how it goes when you undertake your own experiments. We wish you a blessed, joyful, and rewarding new year, and we look forward to seeing you at future AMI events. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. Namaste.
God bless you.